Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Please take your seats. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us today for our very special event, Sights, Sounds, and Scenes, which brings together research, archival innovation, and artistic practice at the intersection of music, technology, and place. I'm Tina Frühauf. I'm the director of the Barriers Book Center for Music Research and Documentation. And I want to begin by thanking you for joining us, friends, colleagues, students, collaborators, and guests. We are thrilled to share this space with you today as we explore a set of projects that reflect the depth, diversity, and dynamism of music research in our time. Let me begin with a few words about the Brook Center. Founded in 1989 by Barry S. Brook, one of the great musicologists of the 20th century, the center was envisioned as a hub for research that both respects tradition and embraces change. In that spirit, the center today is home to a number of major scholarly projects, each rooted in rigorous documentation and open to interdisciplinary dialogue. These include databases, editorial ventures, and digital humanities initiatives that span different musics, languages, and continents. We are situated here at the CUNY Graduate Center in the heart of one of the most musically vibrant ethnodiversities of the world. That's not just an accident of geography, it's a commitment to understanding music not in isolation, but as part of lived culture, shaped by communities, by context, by memory, and by mobility. Today's program, Sights, Sounds, and Scenes, reflects that ethos beautifully. You'll hear and see 3 presentations that in different ways foreground the power of music and technology and the stories they hold. The grand finale is the official launch of the RILM Archive of Popular Music Magazines, or RAPMM. This is a project that we are deeply proud to support. Developed by RILM, the Répertoire International de Littérature Musicale, RAPMM is a growing digital archive of 125 rare and independent popular music magazines and fanzines, spanning genres from punk and hip-hop to indie, metal, country, and beyond. These publications date back to the 1960s and represent a diverse array of voices and scenes from across the globe. The magazines collected in RAPMM are more than just artifacts. They are windows into cultural movements, into grassroots criticism, into musical worlds that were often under-documented. And thanks to the thoughtful design of RILM's eGrid platform, the archive is not just searchable and browsable, but also multilingual and accessible across devices. It's a tool for scholars, certainly, but also for musicians, fans, students, and anyone curious about how popular culture has evolved and been debated, loved, and lived. What makes RAPMM especially meaningful is that it recognizes zines as a form of intangible cultural heritage and representation of cultural diversity, in line with the principles set out by UNESCO. Intangible cultural heritage is about the practices, expressions, and knowledge systems that communities recognize as part of their cultural identity. Zines, especially those created by and for fans, outsiders, and marginalized groups, capture that heritage in print. They are vital testimonies to how music is felt, interpreted, and politicized at the ground level. In preserving and making these resources accessible, RAPMM doesn't just serve academic inquiry. It helps protect and transmit cultural memory and diversity across generations. In addition to RAPMM, we are honored to feature a discussion of GEAR, Cultures of Audio and Music Technologies. This book offers a sharp and often surprising critique of the global fascination with audio production. From vintage synths to cutting-edge studio tech, it's drawing on ethnography and visual analysis. Indeed, GEAR reveals how these technologies are far more than tools. They are cultural objects around which identities are formed, hierarchies built, and mythologies sustained. It's a timely reflection on the technopolitics of music making in the 21st century. We will begin with a discussion of the collaborative project Inside the Studio. This work takes us behind the scenes, literally into the often hidden spaces where electronic music is created. From industrial ruins and basement setups in Berlin to do-it-yourself studios in Cairo's urban sprawl, the project uses photography and interviews to offer an intimate look into environments, tools, and daily practices of producers shaping contemporary soundscapes. It's a vivid example of how sound and place shape one another across borders. Each of the discussions we hear this afternoon in its own way engages with the question at the heart of our work. What does it mean to preserve musical heritage? Who gets to document it and how? And what new forms of knowledge and connection become possible when we bring these materials into conversation with the present? At the Brooks Center, we believe that music research is not just about research and documentation. It's about asking new questions, forming new connections, and expanding access to the materials that matter. Inside the studio, Gear and RAPMM, each is part of a broader vision for more inclusive and globally engaged music studies. So with that, let me thank our speakers, the RILM team, and our staff at the Brooks Center for making today's event possible. Please enjoy the program and don't hesitate to ask questions at the end of our discussion period or strike up later on during the reception or conversation. We are here to connect. Thank you for being with us. And now let's begin with our first discussion. Allow me to introduce our discussant, Finn Cohen. Finn grew up in Durham, North Carolina, and holds a music degree from Duke University. He has been an editor and writer at the New York Times, Apple News, and the Moscow Times. He's associate editor at The Sun. He will be in conversation with Matthias Pasdzierny, a German fellow musicologist who is an academy professor at the Berlin University of the Arts and the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Sciences and Humanities. His main research topics are music and migration, critical editions of tape music after 1945, and the history of techno and electronic dance music. Let us welcome our first speakers.
Thank you, Tina. Matthias has informed me that there are some copies of the book on the table.
That's correct, yeah. First one we passed actually 2 weeks ago. I brought them yesterday from Germany.
And he is now on the table back.
That's true.
One of the things that scared me about the book first was the fact that studios are only in Berlin and Cairo. Why these cities? About that.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea came into my mind like 10 years ago. I would say I started some interviews for other academic topics in Berlin. For example, the studio on the cover of the book is by the famous DJ Ricardo Villalobos, based in Chile, but now living in Germany from a Chilean exile family. So it was related to my research on Tina mentioned music and migration. And I visited him in this room when I was of rooms in general. So the idea started to produce a photo book about this like 8 to 10 years ago, but it took a lot of time to happen. You have to gain a lot of trust to open this kind of doors to you. So it started like snowball effect in Berlin. I asked friends and then friends of friends and suggested other places. So it totally makes sense, of course, to start this kind of project in Berlin as since 2 years now, I think, UNESCO heritage techno electronic dance music like officially approved. Well, maybe some people would say capital of techno in the world. I wouldn't go that far, but officially approved center of this music culture. And I think there are literally like thousands of producers of this music in Berlin. So, and I lived there, so it was an easy start. And Cairo came into the place, to be open for funding reasons. Which made funding is expensive. In the beginning, I thought I could earn some money with it myself, but I learned very quickly. Okay, so I didn't fund. And in this time, I was for 5 years a member of the Arab German Academy of Sciences and Humanities. And I got funding opportunities actually. They said, yeah, we can fund this project, but then another city has to be involved. And then we were thinking about several choices in Cairo for several reasons too. And so we started there too. It was a much more difficult start because I didn't know anyone from the scene, but it grew very quick. And then in the end, it's like very money reason turned out to be a stroke of language because it made them interested in connections. And yeah, also you can compare, of course, different scenes, similarities and connections. Yeah, so that's the story behind these two scenes. But of course, now maybe we can make a second edition of maybe New York and Bombay. I don't know. If we could go on like, for the next 20 years, I guess, in this kind of project.
How did you integrate yourself?
Yeah, it was. I had some help. I knew the people from Goethe Institute in Cairo before, and they had some foot in the door on the scene there. And it was interesting because in Germany you can like write to the management. And when you're lucky, you get an answer and you make an appointment. It totally doesn't work in Cairo. You have to meet the 2 or 3 persons that are in the middle of the network, and then all of a sudden every door is open. And one of the DJs in the book, he was this door opener for us. He is a fantastic person. We met him, and then he said, you know what, let me make some phone calls. And then halfway we had 10 appointments or something. So it was personal contact in Cairo, and then yeah, just go there, and then like then people they say, inshallah, let's check if something works out. So we went to Cairo without any appointment. We stayed for 2 weeks, and then we came back with the photos.
So everything in Cairo was just trip.
No, it was 3 trips altogether. All over India. Yes.
Trust getting into spaces. But there's the same, correct me if I'm wrong, there's the same set of questions from exhibitors here. Okay, photographs. And one of the common themes seem to be, as far as rules in the street, no drinks. Just for still, but
Also,
most people really, and but did you take away anything sort of unifying theme aside from these things that I was going to do, just about producing music in spaces regardless what the actual this was like?
yeah, for me, the most interesting question was actually why do these people still have these studios? Because in Westbam, the famous German producer, he writes in the end and the afterwards, it's not necessary anymore. You could do anything with a computer now. So you could produce anywhere, actually, in the airport, in the train, on your toilet, wherever you want. So, but still, so many people, they have this room. So why do they have it? I found a lot of different answers, but all of these people, they have a certain reason and purpose for having this space. So, of course, coming back to your question, of course, they have like acoustical things, like how do I really soundproof, or how can I beware of annoying the neighbors or my parents living in the same flat or whatever. So this kind of very basic stuff, but much more important, I think, is the question, what is sometimes huge amount of gear is helping me in my creative process. And I think then how you lay out the studio tells a lot about what your hopes are getting this around you. For example, some people they said this gear, this physical gear for me is like a psychological tool. And it reminds me to do something, or it's a representation of myself as being an artist. It shows me that I can afford this room and this gear, so it shows me that what I do is making sense. Or other people, they of course they have also kind of collectives, they use it as a space for dancing and producing at the same time. So I think all of these people, of course, sometimes the studio grows for 20 years, but still then you always have to think about why do I have this space? If I couldn't do anything on the computer, why do I still have it? In Cairo, for example, it was also a nice answer. Cairo is the desert city, and if you don't use your gear, even if it's closed windows, everything is dusty after. So it reminds you to go on working and to not get lazy. So you have to work with your gear, otherwise it's after half a year you can throw it away because there's so much dust. So yeah, I think it's the basic question, what do I need this space for? And then, of course, you have 100 of different answers to that, and from that is the decisions made, how it is designed. You have some of the studios are like white cubes, almost nothing in it, and others are, you know, messed up with stuff, of course.
Did you have any preconceived notions of that's for searching?
Do you mean that the people arrange something for the shoot,
Or if you had some idea of the song before, I mean, studio for I was visiting on the street, you might change.
Yeah, before I wrote an introduction there, there's no existing photo books about this kind of place, but still then you have, of course, like tons of YouTube tutorials or like studio visit films in the internet, so you get a certain impression it's happening. People super professional, nerding with some very specific modules doing crazy stuff. So that was my kind of idea. They have like sound architects or something, so that people really have a plan, and then they are like scientists or whatever working with there. And then what changed really my mind over this crazy 4 or 5 years, that it's much more roles that this kind of spaces have. They also very much like social spaces, also gathering spaces or spaces where you share beer or ideas, knowledge. For example, in Cairo, you have really, these spaces are sometimes in the center of the scene, like a hub, and it's the only possibility for these people to gather. Or, as I mentioned, like dancing and producing all together. In some spaces, like the other rooms, they're using and making party together all the time. So, yeah, I was amazed about the range, spectrum of the diversity of approaches, actually. And that was also a central question for me. Most of this music created in these spaces is created for the club, so for the total access for the party. But is made in the most intense isolation. So how is this working together? And that was also interesting for me to learn how people deal with this. Sometimes they say, I'm in this place for 3 days and I forget about time completely. I don't eat. I'm getting into a flow state. So that was interesting to know how people deal with this, how to say, a bias between total isolation and what you produce there is for the party of thousands. That was really, for me, interesting question. How people get, deal with this.
We were talking, so sorry, mentioned economic student space. You said that some of the students don't
Yes, in Berlin, I think 30% of the groups in the book don't exist anymore, but it's for several reasons, because sometimes I don't know, people separate or move. But you have this situation that normally studio spaces, they are like in basements or former, I don't know, industry spaces, and of course these spaces in the center of Berlin more or less now like they are used for other things. Of course now the gentrification is happening there. And we had also in Berlin a program by the Berlin Center to support these spaces, and then we had funding, financial cuts in this program over the last 2 years. So there are a lot of people there lost their spaces, and you don't find new spaces. So definitely it's economic pressure. And in Cairo, it's a different situation. It was very interesting for me to learn. For example, as a single woman, it's almost impossible in Cairo to rent a space, because then the neighbors, they were very suspicious of this single woman. space. It's like socially very like, yeah, not usual in Cairo. So for a female producer, for example, like makes a lot of them they still live with their parents first because they cannot find spaces to rent their own. So there is of course you have also kind of pressure model that this was there nonsense.
Also, aside from the print, they can sheets. But tell some your conversation. There's a student here in North Carolina. They have a board that is from German in the 60s. I mean, it's very difficult to maintain because the board is like so old. It's beautiful aesthetic and it's incredible sounding, but just simply fix that, find some parts for that becomes a huge part of development in terms of much stuff in the student.
Yes. Yeah, sure. Also, some spaces, if they are too full, it gets incredible hot and it feels on the here in summer. Like this on the cover, Ricardo told me summer it gets like 50 degrees there, sometimes it's Celsius. So really problematic. We had to leave also this studio doesn't exist anymore. It was not the round of Bergheim. And now they do something else with the space. So, and he had the studio for 20 years. It was an incredible mix of layers and layers of cables and I don't know, dirt and rest of drugs or whatever. And really like a jungle. And now he had to clean it out everything after 20 years. I don't know where it is now. Yeah, really sad to see that he actually started the so yeah, but what the other thing you mentioned, we have some, for example, in Berlin that when it's very successful, they even have an own team of engineers and mechanics. For example, Frank Niedemann, he's hiring one person only for repairing synthesizers and like buying stuff like parts. There's for the second book, I guess there's an international market now for trading old gear, especially like the old like 303, 9, something like that. So he's hiring one person only doing that. So full time. So if you're successful enough as a producer, you can keep this. But also old gear running. There's also another one. It's a very successful, I would say, studio influencer, Heimbach, and he's working only with old gear. Yes, Soviet Union synthesizers and stuff, using tape machines. It's traveling all over the world with this. Very exciting. I think 20,000 followers, and I would say it's more like a Instagram producer. From I would say the music is not so super interesting, but he's producing great videos about like some gear stuff. So perfect fit for the second book actually. So you have it's like a substance, I would say, this gear fetish, mostly guys dealing with this. Yeah, but that is sometimes this guy, for example, is playing Bergheim, but it's not so much in the center of the electronic music. This kind of old school pure fetish dance. But we have possibly, we talked about it before, these modular boy bands. It's also ironically called, it's a sub-scene like people with modular synthesizers. It's a whole sub-scene about this. I had the first book presentation about this book like 3 weeks ago in Superbooth, and this is it started a very small thing. Now it's a huge international fair in Berlin, only about this kind of synthesizer. Like thousands of people come from all over the world. It's something in between a festival fair for electronics. So yeah, it's really the second book presentation topic. It's really gear fetishism as a subsidy. Sometimes I think it's not so much about the music anymore, but more about the gear. I felt
Good. We are going to have a moment for audience questions at the very end, but we kind of want to keep the ball rolling, and maybe this is a good moment where actually the microphone is rolling for Matthias to my colleague Elliot Bates in the first row. Please change seats. And while you're changing seats, allow me to introduce Elliot Bates. He's Associate Professor of Ethnomusicology here at the CUNY Graduate Center. Just a few doors down from me, and see each other very often. I'm very happy that he just published his news book together with his colleague Samantha Bennett, who cannot be here with us today because she's in Australia. But I'd like to talk about Elliot because he's the one who is going to answer questions. So Elliot has contributed as a performer, composer, and recordist engineer to more than 90 albums produced in the US, UK, Turkey, and Italy. And he has also contributed to several TV series and feature films. And that's what we don't really see often in a musicologist. And I think that's really worth mentioning before I hand you over into the hands of Finn. So Finn, please continue.
Close to the start of the book, right? A tool does not make a tool performance, but rather it's excellence. Everything above and beyond what is needed for the basic everyone operation tool, whether those are practices, embodiment, sensations, those processes. Can we talk about that maybe
one of the things is when we started the yearbook project, we had the chapter headings in place, but we didn't necessarily know exactly where the book was going to go. And as we started to dig into it and collect stories, and we collected a lot of stories, and we did large-scale analysis of web forms, we started to find these fantastical tales that are being told about these objects that had nothing to do with this is a microphone that's useful for recording a guitar or thing like that. It went well above that. So we started getting some feelings and attitudes and affects, things like this, all attached to the object. And people, to the point that people would dox other people because of having inappropriate attitudes towards technologies. I mean, serious, highly illegal dox incidents on the internet. So that's when we realized we needed to change the focus of our book and really dig into all of these things that are well above and beyond. This is an object that I use for different tasks.
talking shortly before this started, I made a joke. I'm collection building to stop. I joke, maybe you can help me figure out. And you said that we had actually had some type of therapy sessions with people about gear acquisitions. Yes.
Yes.
Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, so Samantha and myself are trying to, this is a work in progress, but we try to help individuals who find themselves no longer making music and only collecting gear and arguing with other people about collecting gear and finding themselves to be in a very unhappy situation. One of the conclusions in our gear book is that this sort of gear-mediated sensibility doesn't make a lot of people very happy. A lot of people are quite deeply unhappy, actually, and we think people should have the opportunity to be happy. So when the gear is getting in the way, then we try to talk with folks and see why do they, there's a new gadget that's been released. What is that attraction that makes them want to start the process of getting a dopamine fix? And we understand from consumer sort of psychological studies in consumers, we understand exactly what the arc of the dopamine response is. And it peaks at the moment just before the purchase is made. It's not about actually having the gear in the studio, the dopamine's already worn off at that point in time. So it's about short-circuiting that. Can you replace that activity that gives you the dopamine release with something else?
But there are things about gear as someone who owns too much that I can say are positive. It allows you to, so as a guitar player, you could say that you could give Bill Frisell or Buddy Guy any guitar and it would still simply sound like that. It's stagnant. But if you give any of them brand new synth pedal that then becomes an extension of that. So there are things that are mechanisms, but there is this known possibility that can come with this, right?
Yeah, I mean, both Samantha and I are very avid gear users. We love recording studios. We love making music, and we do stuff with this. Right? Samantha works mainly in punk rock. I do electronic music, but also sort of, I guess, fusions of Turkish music ideas with electronic music and things like this. And yeah, exactly. There are certain objects open up spaces that we would not be able to open up otherwise. The question is it being driven by the creative needs and the idea that, you know, some sort of creative vision and assemble the apparatus to be able to make that happen? Or is it like, I have a new microphone, I have 58 microphones, there's a studio you work at. We never needed 58, what are we doing with 58 microphones? You know, there was maybe 3 people coming up with the studio maximum. So, I mean, that's where it becomes disconnect. It's like microphones that are not for recording, that have no function in that way at all, other there to show off to other people, and maybe sort of carrying that back and focusing the effort on like, what do I want to create? What might that look like?
So some of this collecting of gear could be described almost as hoarding.
Oh, yes, yeah. And we also looked at the hoarding literature to try to understand. It's a very specific kind of hoarding, though, and it's a little different than some collectors of, you know, specialist objects, partly because of the considerable expense of this, the connoisseurship. Like, I mean, there are people that obsessively collect bottle caps, but there, you're not going to have, this is the bottle cap that was used by a famous person and spend, you know, 150 times what it's normal supposed to be worth. So there's an idea of a connoisseurship, of a heritage and canonization, the sense that one is actually participating in preserving this legacy of great recorded music by owning certain, you know, gear that had historical importance. That's where it goes above normal hoarding, and gear becomes a really special kind of object that has all of these. And those are some of the, getting back to the first question, those are some of the extra meanings that we have.
Something that Matthias said about studios was that you can, for all intents and purposes, can just work inside the box. So you can just use a laptop to produce the same, virtually the same product that you would in a giant studio. So you can do with a computer a lot of things that you could do with physical gear that wouldn't take space, that wouldn't cost as much money, that wouldn't create levels of happiness. So what is it about the physical object you think that is so important?
I mean, one of the funny paradoxes is that just at that moment where there were freely available tools, I mean, no cost tools that you can use to make very high quality recording, including free equalizers and free mixing with capabilities. That's the moment of time when hardware gear starts to become fetishized in a way that it wasn't before. So some people have predicted that the growth of free software would make the whole hardware market collapse. But you know, we both were at Super Booth this year. I rumored there was 12,000 people there in order to get their hands, their grubby hands, as people always refer to it. Get my grubby paws or get my grubby hands on the gear. And people would and wanted to share pictures and videos of other people getting their hands on the gear, things like this. There's something about this you know, interaction with the material world that seems to be extremely important for people at a time when, you know, a computer, you know, that computer, the computer that's running this, you know, is it over there, is it a creative computer? Is it someone just checking their email? Is it just playing back a loop that someone else made? Or what is the computer doing? If you see a computer on stage at a gig, you have no idea what the person is doing. Right, because it looks just like us using a computer to check the email or to check social media or anything like that. So it's not special. There's nothing special about a computer. It's so boring. It's incredibly boring because it's ubiquitous, right? So a weird box with strange colors and very sharp angular edges, huge honking knobs that come from 50 years ago, is very exciting because of its alterity from other objects. It doesn't look like other objects. And it's also useless for most purposes, except for the one specific purpose you can use it for. Okay, we can slightly reduce the dynamic range of a sound, which can be very useful in a professional studio, like some of the ones that we looked at. You may need to do exactly that. But yeah, it's something about this lack of utility for any other purpose. You can't do anything other than that with that box, whereas the laptop can be repurposed in any way, making it more.
I have personally 12 guitars, 4 amplifiers, countless effects pedals, multiple samplers, microphones. I don't need anything else. But to me, I still find myself looking for something, or hearing about something sad, because there becomes this idea of this is good, but it could be better. Or not even it could be better, it could be different. And therefore there's this almost limitless searching that's very exciting, but also creates this idea of something's never finished.
I mean, upgrade-itis is a condition that people talk about, the endless need to upgrade. And you find this in different gear cultures as well, not just in the recording studio gear culture, which we dedicated this book to, but you find it in digital photography spheres. You find it in gaming, like overclocked gaming computers, people buying liquid cooling setups in order to get the fastest performance out of their gaming computer. You find it in espresso machines. You find it in all kinds of, there's a gear culture around espresso machines that's quite separate from actual the love of just drinking coffee. So very intrigued by all these places where people are continually dissatisfied and feeling, yeah, if I just get this one more thing, I would really have the perfect shot of espresso. I'll really make the perfect mix. I'll really have the best modular synth solos. I'll make the ultimate dance track. Or I will have taken the best photo of my dog in the backyard I could ever possibly take. So all of these are sort of different sort of gear culture outcomes, depending on which kind of gear that someone has gotten very obsessed with. So yeah, I mean that's a very real thing. You have a long ways to go to apologies. We did interview a person who was a weaver who left the recording studio gear culture, who had never finished an album his entire life, but had amassed over $1 million worth of studio equipment. That's the extent that it can go. I've got people that have amassed $150,000, $200,000 of modular synthesizers without ever having given a performance or been recording. And these are really, really fascinating to us. And just to back to the same point, it's like if this really was working for these people, and it was bringing them joy and happiness, we wouldn't have the need for the book. Some people can enjoy here and just enjoy. We're not precluding that. But the cultural aspects shape people into always feeling inferior, always feeling dissatisfied, always feeling like it has to be better, that they're compared to other people. So it becomes a surrogate for how these typically men measure themselves against another men. And rather than actually measuring me and my body to you and your body, there's a surrogate of this sort of objects that we've accumulated, that we can attach an economic value to, that shows certain economic prowess. So that's the social aspects.
This goes to the next question. And it's just another quote from the book. Gear also becomes a substitute for interhuman relations, can be gendered, objectified, sexualized, and queer. And the hegemony masculinities of gear cultures which reflect and respond to masculinity crisis, extensive mating changes. What is that?
Well, we get fascinated by a web forum that has 440,000 members, I believe, at this point. That used to be called Gear Sluts, SLUTZ. The Z makes the mention This is one of the co-founders said. It's now called Gear Space after 19 years of complaints they decided neutral name to the forum. But I was very fascinated by forums where someone would post a picture of a piece of gear and say, oh, this is so sexy. Another person would say, are you gassing for it? I say, I'm a boner for it. Someone would say, you're a real gear slut. Someone would say, I hope a gear pimp will come help us out. So we find all this sexual language. And that's one thing. And people will say that sort of stuff. Now, someone might intervene and say, that's ridiculous. Only people can be sexy. This is a square box. Corners, it's not sexy at all. And then you would see a pile 20 to 30 people within a 5-minute period of time, all defending this correct opinion about gear. And so in fact, one of the things we were curious about at the beginning of the book was like, is this a space of play? Is it a place where people can play out their own imaginations of their relation to their gear? And it's not, it's a game. It's a game with fixed rules. It's a game with a certain people that get to control what those rules are. And this is where some of the dissatisfaction comes from. Maybe you have your imagination does go wild, when you're in proximity to the gear. Totally makes sense. Why not? They're natural objects. It makes total sense. But in fact, there's these rigid rules that correct opinions. This gear is sexy and this is not. In fact, this is so unsexy, it's not even gear. It's just a stupid technology that you have to have in the studio. So the fact that there's these lists and people rank it, they create rankings, they do yearly rankings, they come up with rankings of rankings. People create elaborate schema in order to make sense of this whole particular world. That's a game. And it's a very, I'm thinking here of like how David Granger in the Utility Rules talks about the difference between games and play. Play being sort of creative open-ended space, and games being like, oh, we got some sort of complex set of things that we have to follow, otherwise we'll be found to have either failed at the game or cheated at the games.
My great pleasure to introduce to you two of my colleagues from RILM. That is Dr. Beatriz Goubert. He is the product coordinator for the RILM archive of popular music magazines. And she's also an editor covering Latin American publications at RILM. Trained ethnomusicologist, she's deeply engaged in digital humanities projects, such as a collaborative soundscape album with indigenous communities in Colombia. Dr. Goubert currently serves as the General Secretary of the International Association of the Study of Popular Music. With her is Dr. Lindsey Eckenroth. She's also a musicologist whose research and writing are primarily concerned with the intersection of popular music and film, with a particular focus on documentaries, psychogeography, and music consumption under neoliberalism. At RILM, Dr. Eckenroth is Associate Coordinator of RAPMM and works on the technology team. She also teaches in the Contemporary Music program at the New School and publishes the zine Irrational Exit.
So you mentioned before we started with the first email songs that was touching this.
Yeah, we were talking before this. And yeah, it was 2018. It was a meeting invite to discuss how we would approach people that we were trying to get licenses from, as well as trying to write the license itself that we would offer.
What prompted the idea?
Well, there are a few difficult stories around RAPMM, but one of them is that it involves another university. It involves Berkeley College of Music. As many other universities, they were having issues with storage, and they had an amazing collection of popular music magazines and zines. And we were lucky enough to be able to get physical materials from them. So that's how we started. But then something else happened, and it's that probably from the titles that we got originally from Berkeley, we only were able to license maybe 20% of them. So then it was a different question. It was, how can we complete the collection? Because yes, we have a base for it, but then we need to do something else with it. So at that point, we decided to take our, some curatorial concept in our hands. And we decided to open up and start contacting individual authors, one by one, to create the collection. That's how we completed it.
So what was that process like for example, when you find one person, what's the outreach look like? And how long will that process take?
Oh, wow. It takes a long time. And I think at the very beginning of the project, it took a long time because nobody knew who we were and what were we doing. You know, these people in New York trying to create an archive of zines, but who are they, you know? I mean, so it took us a long while to create trust. But I think just as it happened to the studios in Egypt, once we were able to get to the network of people, we basically went with word of mouth. It's, you know, sometimes it was a Zoom call, sometimes it was people visiting us in our office, sometimes it was 55 different emails to answer every single questions that the authors could have. And then once we could, you know, get one of those titles, we would ask them to, you know, if you could ask more titles, what would you like to see in our collection? And we would go from there as well. It was a lot of word of mouth.
Did you do a lot of work on the ground actually trying to some of the publications?
Not a ton of that, but we did, like, we went to ABC or for example, to just even find out about different titles, right? Because there's no place to really go look at it. They're all the seeds published in X place at X time. So great places to find exhaustive lists. So that was an example. CUNY's bookstore in Chicago, and getting in touch with Liz Mason, who has been running that store for a very long time and herself, right, scenes was huge. She pointed us in a lot of different directions. But otherwise it's been Berkeley, and then we get whoever has licensed with us to either send us physical copies or digital files.
Did some of those people have to do their own type of treasure hunts to find copies?
Yes, totally. You know, by contacting the authors, we heard the most amazing stories, including, oh, I think I have a box in my basement, but let me, you know, figure it out. Or sometimes, you know, oh, I only have the 3 latest issues, but let me ask my friends because someone might have, you know, the earlier issues. So it was totally a matter of collective memory. Yes, and in some cases we could not get all the issues, but for most of what we have complete ones.
And they mailed the physical copies to you?
Well, it depends. If they have not scanned them themselves, yes, they would mail them to us. We would scan them and then return them. But some people already had digital copies, so we would go from there. And in some cases, with some titles, the only thing that was left was the digital copies. So even though we want to have high quality, sometimes we have to make different decisions and accept low quality, because it was the only resource that we had to put in the collection.
Were there any particular titles that you enjoyed uncovering or reading more than others?
There's so much, I mean, so I've looked through, I mean, almost every page of this at some point probably, so it's like, it's all keeps washing my head. Different titles for different reasons. Rocktober in particular has fantastic comics. The Skinny Puppy Farewell Fancy, and that's not the exact right title, but absolutely beautiful single issue, kind of like a perzine, exquisitely done. It's like pink and black color scheme. But it's honestly hard to Like that's just two that come to mind.
Yeah, it's really difficult to pick and choose, but I would say that I would add to that list, hardware architecture, because it's this idea based on the studios where most of the albums were recorded. This guy would bring this information. He would take information from other things or from albums directly, and he would geolocate each one of these places. And we put a picture of for Google on how that place looks today. Sometimes they're just random houses or the place do not exist anymore. But he would, take the time and the labor of love to georeferentiate these places and say something about each one of the place where the visit was recorded. So that's one of my favorite ones. But yeah, there are like so many titles that we could be here all night long. But if you want to know more of, some of our favorites, we have the second zine that we created with Lindsey, and we have some lists there of top zines that you can find in our collection.
What, looking through all of this history, did it teach you about the present? I mean, for me, looking at it, I felt a little bit of sadness because there isn't as much of that type of writing that's widely accessible physically anymore. Whereas it used to be, you could go to newsstands or bookstores, and that's unfair music. And now it's a lot easier to learn from. Was there anything that the past taught you about the present?
Yeah, and I would have to kind of disagree because yes, it brings some sort of nostalgia into our lives, especially for some of the people who lived through different decades of music. But it also brings a lot of hope because with Generation Z, we found zines. So at some point, when we had blogs in the 1990s and early 2000s, and we had electronic zines, it was a thin moment. But after that, again, there's new generations of people writing zines. And I think part of what we were able to create with Lindsey in the collection is to have titles that from the very early 60s, but also titles that only started 2 or 3 years ago that are still in print, because one of the few conditions that we had to include materials was that it had to be in print. So, for example, the scenes that only went, online, we could not grab those. But I think there's nostalgia there, where there's also hope. And the hope is also because there are a lot of young generations interested in what was published in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I think it's like a meeting of different generations. They look at materials differently, but that's what we want to people to have conversations about what's significant.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I think when in 2018, apparently, when we started doing this, I would not have guessed how many things from the last 15 years we have in the collection, right? Like, so I'm sort of surprised at how much production of scenes is still happening. And a little bit, I mean, Elliot, I think what you said about the computer is boring, right? It's like, well, your Instagram account is boring, but your zine is it's a physical object. You can, you take it around. It's a different kind of thing. So I think maybe that is something that, I always sort of thought was true, but in doing this project, I realized that people seem to feel that way as well.
There's some remarkable evolution in some of the publications. Punker starts out almost as like a hand-drawn black and white scene, and by the end of it, it's almost like a glossy magazine. Did you find those sort of aesthetic evolutions in other publications that you were working with?
Yeah, it's very interesting when you compare the history of each one of the titles. You can find different trajectories. You can find other examples of zines that started, like with 50 copies and ended up selling 2,500 copies. But also you find titles that remain the same, no matter what, and that they were published for a long time. And then you find editors that wanted that have a long career, but they only publish scenes for 2 years, and then they switch to a different title, and then another title. So there are like different paths here. But I think what's common in all those paths is the labor of love that each one of these people put into creating a zine. Because most of them didn't do a lot of money, most of them lost money. So it's really what connects each of these histories is that they do it because they care about the scenes. They care not about the zines, but the scenes. They care about the bands, they care about the musicians, they care about the places. And they care so much that they decide to create a publication and talk about what's important to them.
How did the producers of the Once in Part Archive, how do they feel about the product that you have now? Have you shared it with them yet?
Like right now, I mean, so has anyone seen like maybe not even screenshots of things yet? I guess we're about to find out. Which actually, to your earlier question about like how the licensing process went and getting to talk to people, I feel like there's the whole chicken or the egg problem. It's like, wouldn't it be great if we could show them this flashy, fantastic website with all this stuff on it, and we'll be like, your thing could be on here. But like, we need you to sign this license first before we can go forward and make this fantastic website. So we're now switching off this folded, yeah, getting to see the reaction.
And this will be an ongoing project, correct?
Yes, it will be an ongoing project, and the idea is that every year we're going to include more titles. For example, we already have 2 or 3 titles that we know that we're going to include, but we need to go through all the QC process and all the minutiae that we need to do so that people can have those titles there. But for example, Your Rocker is coming to our collection, Lobotomy is coming to our collection, and some international scenes. So.
Are there people that you haven't been able to reach, but that you have on a list that you'd really like to have?
Oh, yes, our wish list is long. And we've learned, through our authors that our wish list can get longer and longer. And we've also gotten a lot of rejections, nice and ugly rejections sometimes. But, we give it a try, and we were able to construct what we have here.
What is an ugly rejection? Just, I mean, if you're trying to preserve what someone did in the past, there would be some sort of honoring.
I feel like the worst one for me was, we spent a fair amount of time, and actually I shouldn't say it. Beatriz mostly was the person reaching out to people we were trying to license with, but I did some of it. And there was one in particular that I spent all this time with email. I really personalized it, put in some of myself in it, right? It's multiple paragraphs, trying not to be weird. And I just get a no thanks. Just no thanks. Purely unsigned, no thanks. And they're just like, well, and then you think maybe I could follow up, ask about the reason, they should know. But yeah. One time we also spent a lot of time Zooming and then emails, like maybe 30 or 35 emails to finally find out that the person did not have the rights. Unfortunately, maybe it's good collection. And for things like that, it's difficult. I mean, we don't have a way to check that beforehand, because in more standard publications, this would be very easy, but for us, it's not. So yeah. That's one of the ones that we spend a lot of time. And sometimes there was no confusion with the authors because probably for the people in this room and for the people in the live stream, it's kind of very clear why popular music is valuable, right? But not for everyone. So at some point, a couple of authors, basically they had agreed, and then they said, we are going to sign a license and there's some money involved, and they thought I was charging them to include the publication into the collection, and they were really mad. So yeah, things like that.
And the plan from what you're telling me earlier is that this will be accessible through libraries for the first year or 2.
Yes, the idea is that for the first couple of years, collection will be available through for libraries, for institutional subscriptions. But probably starting year two, we'll open it for individual subscriptions. That's something that we are still working on.
One thing that you and I spoke about last week was also the aspect of this that goes beyond music, but also fashion and pop culture. This can be a tool for multiple businesses, right?
Yes, exactly. When we start, or when I, spend time reading these articles and going through the pages, it is very clear to me that it's not just about music. Of course, it's about music, but then it's about life. It's about society, it's about politics, it's about counterculture, it's about resistance, and it's a lot about of a whole range of topics that we care about. And that then it's not only crucial for popular music scholars, but for anthropologists, for journalists, for visual people, for fashion studies, for American studies. I mean, the list is really, really long. And maybe an easy example for that is that we have maybe 5 or 6 types from Spain. And it's very interesting because in Spain there was a dictatorship until 1975. So basically nothing about popular music was published. And then when Franco dies, and it starts La Movida Madrileña, which is the counterculture in Madrid and then in Barcelona and then in Valencia. And then all of a sudden this scene starts to be published. So if you want to know about the political context that was, how was going back to democracy in Spain, you go to the scenes because it's right there. Even, for example, the authors of these scenes will tell you how on earth they managed to get records from England, for example, without getting censored. So it's music, but it's politics, it's society, and it's life there. And the other part of it is that it's life, it's a first-hand account. It's people who care, so they'll tell you, yes, I love the band, or I hated the band, please do not see them ever again, don't waste your money. They care about the places, they care about the records, so it's a first-hand account on what was happening in multiple places at the same time.
You mentioned that there are some forthcoming seats from other countries. What are the parts of the world?
We are looking at different places, but one of the places that we want to get soon into the collection is France. We are going to do a presentation in a conference there, so hopefully we'll be able to create the connections to have the tenants.
Well, I want to leave some room for questions.
I'd like Elliot and Matthias also come up, and maybe one of you can pull a chair. And we have now time for questions, and in any kind of order. Mike Lupo has the microphone, so if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand and he will come over.
Great, I just asked them to post the mic for everyone who's joining us remotely.
Hi, my name is Arthur. I'm a vertical starter who has been friend to RILM and RAPMM for quite a few years. And I just wanted to say the first email that I have mentioning RAPMM was 2015 in April. That was been more than a decade. So, and just congratulations to you for getting this incredible prototype up and running. And I just am curious if you guys are in touch with any of the other online. I realize that there are all kinds of different electronic databases of print materials that are developing, basically products that point toward libraries. I think there are a few others out there too. Do you have collegial relations with some of the other kind of database programs out there? Does it feel like somehow there's any kind of competition and get your zine roster before somebody else gets their zines on? This is really a competitive space, but just sort of curious about that. So I've seen things like Rock's back pages and a few other things out there. to give you a comment to what you offer. I'm curious to hear.
There are a few resources out there, but I think we are kind of unique. So in that sense, we don't think it's competition, it's more collaboration. So for example, RAPMM pages work very differently. It works with individual authors of each article. So if you get a title there, you might find 3 articles that were published in an issue, but you don't have the entire issue, for example. And that's one of the things that we wanted to do differently. We wanted to have as much as we could complete collections. And yeah, we have some relations with other collections, especially with university collections. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add a thing that I totally just forgot I was gonna say. Oh, yeah, that we, I hope that it will be a collaborative spirit going forward too. I think we'll see how this all unfolds, but what we've said to a lot of people who we've licensed with is that, the value of this as a product is not just that we're gonna digitize this thing and sell it already and put it somewhere, it's that it's now searchable with all of these other zine friends, right? And this is gonna be a discovery entity and that kind of spirit, right? So there's nothing, the license agreement we have is not exclusive. We don't care if you have this elsewhere. We don't care if you're selling print copies. The value of this is the database and all of these things coexisting together in a searchable way.
And multilingual too. I mean, I think it wasn't brought up, but they're Chinese scenes. And how many people in this room speak Chinese, except for the 2 that I know of? You'll be able to actually read the materials in a language you know due to integrated translation capabilities. So that's a huge advantage in order to be inclusive, truly inclusive, not just within our environment, but globally. There was a question, I think, from the right side, yes.
I was thinking about, I don't know if you have like Clean magazine maybe in there. I keep on seeing Robert Griffin from Scat over here, who I know a little bit, keep on flashing, which is weird. Like James Scott and Robert from Team stuff. But I was thinking, like, are you also considering things like there's things that kind of border between like zines and alternative weeklies? Like there's kind of like things like that sort of like skate that thing where they're kind of regular, at least especially in the 90s when alternative weeklies were booming. That kind of are like scenes. Like I'm thinking particularly of one that I desperately wish I kept the copies of when they were coming out, and of course I didn't. But in the 90s, there was it wasn't an alternative weekly, and it was kind of a regional thing. It wasn't centered in Columbus, but it was focused on Columbus, called Moo, and it was around for several years, maybe 5 years. I don't know, it's hard to remember, but it was kind of like Arthur, a regional Arthur in a sense, kind of like that, but it was a really, really cool, it was free. Or it's like almost like if Arthur and the Brooklyn Rail were like indie rock kind of thing, and it was free, big tabloid, style, and you could find it in Cleveland, you could find it in Cincinnati, maybe in Indiana, maybe here, but it was centered in Columbus, but it was all music, and it was great, and it was and had columns, reviews, articles about local bands, international, or national touring indie bands, etc. So I'm wondering if like something like that is something on your radar, like that you'd be into. Like it kind of skirted that. It wasn't an alternative weekly, but it was kind of, I can't remember if it came out monthly or quarterly, but I think it was monthly. Anyway.
Well, I think love this, so we should look into this.
Well, there's the offense. Yeah, I thought I saw you guys had the offense on here. You know, I need the offense.
So
The offense is like from Columbus. It's one of the great early indie scenes. Really good writing too. Anyway, but that was from Columbus. But Boo was more like that's, and I guess I'm just interested. Like the offense is like scene for sure, but like something like Moo was like. It's just like a weird, is it an alternative weekly? Is it a zine? I don't know. But I'm just wondering if that would be like something that.
I would say yes, something like we have things that I have things that I'm just straight up call magazines, but like in particular, I'm thinking The deli that we have is kind of that same thing. It's very local based, a lot of, I mean, both major bands, but like very New York focused. And there's also, they would do Austin issues as well as LA issues. And then CMJ, which we have the College Media Journal, which is absolutely huge. And actually, that is one of the ones that we still need copies of some of them. It's
Free
super great.
mag, remember he posed mag, brief run, mag, we're checking out, which is a. Anyway. So my take was, before I just talk about scenes forever, but. We'll check out Moon. I mean, it was like, I really wish I had kept those issues, but I think it was a lot of writing about 90s indie rock that would be kind of like.
I think another big question.
Hey, congratulations, y'all. So excited. It just occurred to me when you were talking about pushback that you got from some people that just like flat out no. Have you encountered an attitude that like, you know, being part of an archive, being part of academia is like not punk or like anathema to the spirit of a scene, and like you just had to be there and you have to have your collectors. Like, do you think there's an element of that, or am I just entertaining myself? I think always knew it exists, right? I think we had started this project, well, according to Arthur, it started in 2015, but if we had started a decade earlier, probably the answer for many of the others will be no. And I think time has helped. The fact that, you know, some of those scenes were published in the 60s has created enough time distance for people to realize that it's important to archive them, and it's important for them to be in one single place, and it's important to have digital copies of them to be accessed. So yeah, that was part sometimes of the conversation. Yeah.
And the question from Kevin.
Say, a question for the community. There are professions, tons of YouTube channels, for example, that do reviews and stuff. I was going to take it for free. You know, very rarely see that. How do you think that, like social media and how do you think that plays into this function? In this book, we didn't talk a lot about the review culture on YouTube because that kind of began right at the end period of our research and really exploded. Now we have the book I'm working on, a direct module synthesis. I did very much with that phenomenon. I have a whole chapter on YouTubers. And why the goal now, and this has become a thing, recording studio cultures as well. The goal is not to own the studio. The goal is not to be a recording engineer. The goal is to be a hero reviewer. And that's an extremely interesting development, right? And so, in a sense, we kind of trace the early history of that, how sort of magazines, and in fact, actually one that began as a zine, magazine called Tape-Off. I don't know if you've come across this. How they're pretty good about doing their own archiving, but they work with them. So like how Tape-Off and Sound on Sound and recording and Mix Magazine created an entire culture around, creating a whole idea about what these objects are. That's from a reviewer mindset. And as you pointed out, they're always positive. And you wonder, like, how can every single one of these things be so amazing? And how can every one of them be, you're also fascinated, how can every one of them be a secret weapon? I mean, you're reading about it in a magazine that has 100,000 circulation. I mean, that secret's out there. You know, have a problem. So, but gear reviews online. There's now about 30 different gear podcasts just for recording studio gear. That's another goal, is to become a gear podcaster. So yeah, it's interesting. This is all sort of the lateral expansion of the gear culture into, again, everything except for making music with it.
Maybe I can add to this. What we recognize is that you have now the factor of like an Instagrammability of the studio. So you have this sort of hipster studios. There's a certain area in Berlin where you can find them. And you have a lot of, all of a sudden you have a lot of plants in the studio, like monster plants in the studio. And you have these super successful Instagram channels, also some of the really weird names like studio porn. And it's like thousands of stereotype authentic studio pictures, and you see studios, they look like AI generated, and it's, no one has ever really worked there, but they look amazing on Instagram. So you have this tendency for sure, and you find these places in Berlin. But I have to say it's still very rarely, and it's kind of, I mean, it doesn't really make sense. Still have a studio audience to take pictures on it. So yeah, but you can see the influence definitely.
There's one euphemism that is ubiquitous in multiple Gero cultures, pics or it didn't happen. So you have to show proof that you are the person that has this Gero. So.
I know that your archive really focuses on print, but there were other sort of parallel sort of mediated spaces where this kind of what was going on. What leads to mind for me is, you know, like sort of cable TV. And then I think of you know, an interview show called Video Wave that took place here in New York. Just looking like what's happening to those kinds of let's say echoes or different formats. I think of Warhol, right, who tries a bunch of different formats. So are people looking into are having those parallel processes?
I honestly, like, that is not an area that I'm super familiar with, but I will say in terms of the different media, it's interesting that a lot of, not a lot, I don't know what percent, 10% maybe of the scenes in the collection in RAPMM will have some sort of like CD component, flexi disc, even just playlists that would be like associated with them. And originally we were like, wouldn't it be cool, you know, if we could have this as well, but just, you know, copyright. So yeah, that's a, you know, sort of beyond the scope of what we investigated for this project.
Yeah, I mean, one of our hopes when we started was, oh, hey, maybe we could, you know, have that music that can inflect this or tape records, so, you know, but of course we cannot do that, but at least we know it's there. And I think for the people who received these scenes who went to buy the scenes or got them in the mail, it was super amazing to receive a printed thing, you know, with some stories and some reviews, and then have a tape and you could play it along with what you were reading. So we have to say that we cannot provide that part of the magic, but hopefully we'll be able to replace it with playlists.
And we did scan the CDs front and back and the covers, so it's in there, so you get the sense of it and then you can.
Down to the RAPMM project, I was just wondering, did you have any issues with scope? Just thinking back obviously to the 60s, even what is now considered more, you know, Western serious music, like maybe Star Rhythms and things like that, where a lot of the magazines were actually covering alternative pop and, you know, some of the fringe stuff. And also where I'm from in South Africa, there was also a big, you know, I've said overlap between vernacular music, you know, from certain races, which is, you know, pop music, Bulgarian music. So I was just wondering, did you have problems like drawing a line?
It's always a bit tricky, but we try to focus on the whole content because some of the publications will focus for one issue or two, for example, in very specific scenes or very specific subgenres. Or, for example, some of the titles will have content, very popular music-oriented contents for two scenes, but for two titles, for two issues, I'm sorry. But then you'll have completely different topics for the rest of it. So it's you know, basically it's yeah.
This is the last moment for the last question. I see you want to celebrate. So before we celebrate, a few things. First of all, if you want to know more about the Brooks Center, about RILM, about the publications we discussed, please take a look at the table over there, and you find RILM's own homemade zine. 2 issues are out already, and things to take away for free, as well as desk copies of the books that we discussed today. So before I invite everybody to a drink and a bite, I'd like to thank our 4 speakers and our interviewee for their really wonderful time that they gave us. Please join me. I want to thank you for being with us, and I'd like to introduce and invite DJ Jason Lee. It's now time to turn up the volume. Give him an applause.